Sweet corn. Sweet corn exists because of a single genetic mutation that broke the plant's ability to turn sugar into starch. And instead of fixing it, farmers just kept growing it. That one accident is why corn tastes sweet off the cob. The mutation was first noticed in the 1700s, but sweet corn didn't become the most common type until the 1900s. For most of human history, people ate a starchier, tougher corn and just thought that was normal. Native Americans had been growing sweet corn long before Europeans ever arrived, but early colonists actually looked down on it and considered it lower quality. It took jarring and canning technology in the 1800s to get sweet corn into more homes, and once refrigerated shipping arrived, it completely changed what Americans expected from summer food. But the plant is finicky. Once you pick it, the sugar immediately starts turning into starch, which is why the sweetness fades so fast after harvest. The corn most people think of as totally normal is actually a genetic accident, and not even a very old one. Glass gem corn. In 2012, a single photo of this corn spread across the internet, and millions of people assumed it had been edited because no real corn looks like that. It hadn't been touched. Glass gem was developed by a Cherokee farmer named Carl Barnes, who spent decades crossing old Native American corn varieties in Oklahoma. Varieties that had nearly been lost when indigenous communities were forcibly moved from their land in the 1800s and separated from their seeds. Barnes spent much of his life tracking those seeds down, and glass gem was essentially the result of reuniting corn genetics that had been scattered by colonization. After Barnes passed the seeds to a friend, one photo hit the internet in 2012 and triggered one of the earliest viral food moments of the social media era. The kernels are translucent and jewel-toned. Reds, purples, blues, greens, golds, and look almost fake. But it's not a sweet corn. It's starchy, dense, and nutty. Closer in texture to something you'd grind into flour than anything you'd eat off the cob. It's so visually striking that industrial sorting machines bruise and damage it. So one of the most photographed foods in the world almost never makes it into a grocery store. Bloody butcher. During the Civil War, Confederate soldiers were documented eating this corn completely raw off the stalk, too hungry and too exhausted to cook it, and still described it as the best corn they had ever tasted. Bloody butcher has been grown in the Appalachian South since at least the early 1800s. And some food historians believe it traces back to Native American varieties that predate European settlement entirely. It was so common in 19th century Appalachia that it was basically the default corn for grinding. Most families in the region would have eaten Bloody Butcher cornbread their whole lives without thinking of it as anything special. At its peak, it was one of the most widely grown corns east of the Mississippi River. Then within just a few decades, the rise of industrial farming wiped out most of it. Not because it tasted worse, but because newer hybrid varieties were easier to standardize and ship at scale. The red-streaked kernels grind into a deep, reddish cornmeal, unlike anything sold in a store, and the small groups still growing it today are essentially keeping alive something that was almost erased from American food entirely. Blue corn. Blue corn tortilla chips have been sitting on American grocery store shelves for decades, but almost nobody eating them knows the corn itself has been grown continuously by the same native communities in the American Southwest for over 1,000 years. Archaeological evidence puts blue corn cultivation in New Mexico and Arizona back to at least 1000 AD, with some sites suggesting it goes back even further. The Hopi people famously used ground blue cornmeal in a ceremony where it was sprinkled along the path of a newborn child. It was literally the first thing a new life encountered. The deep blue to purple color comes from the same natural pigment found in blueberries, concentrated in the outer layer of the kernel. The flavor is richer, nuttier, and almost savory on its own, like the corn already has seasoning in it. It also survives drought and extreme heat swings that would kill most modern corn varieties, making it uniquely suited to high desert conditions where other crops simply fail. Strawberry popcorn. Farm stand. Customers regularly pick this up and bite directly into the ear before anyone can stop them. Because it looks almost exactly like a strawberry, right down to the rounded tip and deep red color. Strawberry popcorn is one of the oldest documented popcorn varieties in the Americas, with evidence of its use stretching back thousands of years among farmers in Central and South America. Popcorn itself is actually older than most other ways of eating corn. Archaeologists found 5,000-year-old popped kernels in Peru, and there's strong evidence that some of the very first corn humans ever ate was popped, not ground or boiled. When Spanish explorers encountered popcorn for the first time in the Americas, they were reportedly completely baffled by it. They had never seen a food that cooked itself by exploding. The ears are rock solid and starchy raw, so you're not eating them off the cob. But when popped, the flavor is mild and nutty. In North America, it is simply the most convincing disguise any vegetable has ever pulled off. Painted mountain corn. This corn was developed by one man, working essentially alone on a Montana farm, hand-crossing hundreds of Native American varieties over 2 full decades. It can survive frosts that would kill every other corn variety on Earth. It can fully mature in as few as 85 days, making it one of the only corns that works in places where summer lasts less than 3 months. Dave Christensen, who started developing it in the 1970s, pulled specifically from the cold weather genetics of native nations across the northern plains and mountain west, communities that had been successfully growing frost-resistant corn for centuries out of pure necessity. The corn essentially made grain farming possible in parts of North America where it had never reliably worked before. The ears come out in layered yellows, reds, oranges, purples, and near blacks all on the same cob. Ground into flour, it tastes noticeably sweeter and more complex than standard yellow cornmeal. And the first time most people bake with it, they're genuinely surprised by how much flavor it has. Mandan Bride. Lewis and Clark wrote about this corn in their journals in 1804 and documented trading for it because their expedition was running low on food. The Mandan people of the Missouri River Valley had been growing it so long that it was already an ancient, well-developed crop by the time the expedition arrived. And the Mandan were known among neighboring nations as master corn farmers who had developed some of the most productive cold weather varieties on the Great Plains. They stored corn in underground pits that kept it through brutal North Dakota winters, and their surplus made them one of the most economically powerful nations in the region. Other tribes traveled hundreds of miles specifically to trade for Mandan corn. When smallpox epidemics tore through the Mandan population in the 1830s, reducing thousands of people to just a few hundred survivors, most of that agricultural knowledge nearly disappeared with them. Small cobs are tightly packed with cream, red, blue, and yellow kernels, and taste surprisingly sweet for how starchy the corn actually is. The ears are too small and fragile for industrial harvesting machines, which is the main reason one of the most historically significant corn varieties in North America is still almost completely unknown. Peaches and cream. Old farming advice used to say, get the water boiling before you even walk out to the field, because sweet corn starts losing its sugar within 30 minutes of being picked. Peaches and cream is probably the variety most responsible for that advice existing. It was developed through mid-1900s breeding programs, specifically designed to push sweetness and tenderness as far as they could go, and it worked so well that it basically defined what an entire generation of North Americans thought corn was supposed to taste like. Before refrigerated trucks made fresh corn available everywhere, most Americans only knew corn from cans or dried products. Eating it straight off a summer cob was something you could only do if you lived near a farm. The cream and gold kernels are tender, thin-skinned, and almost liquid when you press them, releasing a sweet, grassy juice at peak ripeness. In Canada and the northern United States, it's considered the gold standard of summer corn, but it's so delicate that it gets damaged during long shipping, which is why the best ears almost always have to be bought close to where they were grown. Hopi Pink. The Hopi people have at least 24 distinct name varieties of corn, each one tied to specific ceremonies, seasons, spiritual figures, and clans. Hopi Pink is among the most important of all of them. Corn is so central to Hopi beliefs that it appears in their creation stories. The Hopi believe humans were made from corn, and each color of corn is connected to a direction, a meaning, and a specific use in ceremony. Hopi farmers developed dry farming methods that allowed them to grow corn in near-desert conditions with as little as 10 inches of rain per year, planting seeds up to a foot deep to reach moisture hiding underground. That kind of extreme growing condition, practiced over hundreds of years, produced varieties with a drought resistance and a flavor depth that modern plant scientists are still studying. The dried kernels are a soft, dusty rose color, and even the ground flour has an unusual silkiness and an almost floral sweetness that no commercial yellow corn flour comes close to. Because the flour is delicate and doesn't last long after grinding, it has never entered commercial markets. The only way to taste it the way it's meant to be tasted is close to where it grows. Bloody Aztec sweet corn. Aztec farmers were running the most sophisticated plant breeding program on Earth, growing dozens of distinct corn varieties at once, centuries before anyone in Europe had even written down the basic rules of how plants pass on their traits. The Aztec food system at its height fed a city of over 200,000 people, making it one of the largest urban food operations in the pre-industrial world, and corn was the foundation of all of it. Aztec farmers also developed a system of raised garden islands built in lake systems specifically to grow more corn and vegetables, an agricultural method that European farming science wouldn't catch up to for centuries. Bloody Aztec sweet is a direct descendant of that tradition. The kernels range from deep red to nearly black, and when they're young and unripe, they're sweet, tender, and creamy with a slight earthiness underneath. Dried and ground, they make a dark-colored dough with a richer, deeper flavor than standard corn mesa. It's essentially invisible in commercial markets because there's no system in place for shipping a corn that visibly changes color after it's been harvested. Floriani Red Flint. In northern Italy, restaurants now charge premium prices for a simple corn porridge made from this corn. And older locals who grew up eating it as poor farmers' food find that completely baffling, because for them, it was just what corn tasted like. Corn arrived in northern Italy from the Americas in the 1500s and spread so fast through the region that within a century, it had become the main food of the rural poor, eaten as a thick-cooked porridge at nearly every single meal. For hundreds of years, this corn and varieties like it were associated with poverty and hard labor. Then, in the late 1900s, as flavorless, mass-produced versions flooded the market, chefs and food writers rediscovered the old regional varieties and suddenly declared them artisanal and special. The small, angular kernels are vivid red-orange inside with a more roasted, complex smell than anything in a standard grocery store bag. Cooked low and slow, it develops a rich, nutty depth that transforms even the simplest preparation. And that quality is almost entirely destroyed if the corn is processed using industrial grinding methods that strip out the flavorful inner part of the kernel. Oaxacan green. Researchers who study where corn originally came from treat this variety as a living piece of history, a direct genetic window into what corn looked like thousands of years ago. Corn was first grown from a wild grass in southern Mexico roughly 9,000 years ago, and the Oaxacan region was one of the earliest and most important places that happened. The Zapotec people, who built one of the first cities in the Americas, depended on corn varieties like this one as the foundation of their food system for over 1,000 years. Some of the genetic traits in Oaxacan green trace directly back to those very early growing practices in ways that modern corn has completely lost. The dried kernels are deep green to nearly teal, darkening as the ear dries out, and they genuinely look like carved gemstones. When the kernels are soaked and treated in the traditional way, a process that unlocks nutrients and transforms the flavor, it produces one of the richest and most complex corn doughs used in traditional Mexican cooking. It grows better on steep hillsides with unpredictable rainfall than any modern hybrid corn ever could, which is part of why it's survived this long.